Hello, and welcome to Hopkins at Home. Thank you for joining us. I am Angela Batra, and I am the Senior Program Manager for the Online Math Department at Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth. I am so excited to welcome you today to the showing of Secrets of the Surface, the mathematical vision of Maryam Mirzakhani. We will spend the first hour watching the film, and then we will have time to answer your questions and chat at the end. We welcome you to ask any questions you have by typing them into the chat module on your screen throughout the film. I would like to introduce my fellow panelists, Dr. Emily Reel, the Associate Professor of Mathematics at Johns Hopkins University. And I would also like to welcome the director of the film, George Chichery. George, could you start us off by giving us a brief description of the film?
Well, certainly, Angela, I want to stress that it's a great pleasure to be a participant in the Johns Hopkins program that shows Secrets of the Surface. This is a film that was an initiative of the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute in Berkeley, one of the two or three major mathematical institutes, research institutes in the world, and an organization I've been very happily working with for about 15 years on several films. And this was a biographical film about an outstanding mathematician who was a pioneer in many areas, particularly breaking ground as the first woman to win the Fields Medal in 2014. Maryam Mirzakhani was really an outstanding, unique mathematician who worked in several fields that are only now being linked. And Dr. Reel, I think, will be able to expand on that. A lot of that is in the film. We started the film production in 2018. Maryam Mirzakhani was no longer with us. She died at a young age. And I don't want to say more about that. That unfolds in the film. And we completed the film and premiered it in January 2020. And so far it has had great reception. And I hope that it becomes an inspirational piece for particularly girls, college students, and women trying to pursue careers in mathematical research and teaching and the sciences in general. Are we about to watch the film now?
Yeah, let's get started. Thank you so much, George. Wow. George, thank you so much for making this film. I've watched it twice now, and it just gives me chills, having been a woman in mathematics and not having a lot of representation at the time that I was in the field. So we have about a half hour to answer your questions. Feel free to continue putting questions in the chat, and I'll start with just an introduction of who we are, so you have a sense of what types of questions we might be able to answer and maybe not. So let's start with Dr. Emily Reel. Could you just give us a brief intro of yourself and your work, and maybe a little bit about being a woman in math?
Sure. So my name's Emily Reel. I'm an associate professor at Johns Hopkins, so I teach in the math department here. I work in a completely different area from Maryam, something called category theory and homotopy theory. But her math is super beautiful. And in fact, I was at the lecture that is shown in the film where she's giving a colloquium style talk. So a talk to a general mathematical audience about the dynamics of surfaces. And one thing I remember from that lecture, which you can actually see, it's on YouTube if you want to watch the full 2 hours yourself, is that she sort of very generously gave the audience a problem to think about, sort of a much easier problem than the sort of problems that she would solve, but kind of a teaser to get into the area of billiard problems. And I was very taken by this and spent a few weeks afterwards thinking about it until figuring it out. So.
Thank you. And George, I know you gave us an introduction to the film earlier, but could you tell us a little bit about your background and your work and what inspired you to make this film?
Well, I have been a filmmaker since 1968, and I made a film in the late 80s, early 90s about a mathematician named Paul Erdős. And what they like to say these days, it was a game changer in my career, because he was the right choice to do an introductory biography on a mathematician, since everyone knew who he is. And he opened the world of mathematics to me. And I have been working in mathematical biography ever since, which is very odd, since my background is in social science and literature and history and things like that. So I like to say that I'm a refugee from the social sciences, and that mathematics has really been very kind to me. And the mathematicians are wonderful subjects, primarily because of their passion for their work and their interest in their deep interest in the material. And I think that the way to reach general audiences who are for some reason intimidated by mathematics at a very early age, and that continues through most of their lives, is by introducing them to the people who do the work and letting those people speak for themselves. As you see, there's so many great mathematicians in this film, and every one of them is really passionate about what they do and have strong feelings. They're not machines. They're happy to explain what they're doing, even though it might be a little difficult and you have to pay attention. And in my case, they have to explain it over and over and over again so that I can figure out how much of it can be communicated. But I feel that presenting the people behind the mathematics has been a very productive approach. And I hope it works in this film. I hope it works in some of my other films, but ready for any other questions.
Well, thank you. That's great. I thought you did a really great job of taking very abstract mathematics and giving us an idea of what it was. When I was in graduate school, I thought there's only about 5 other people in the world who can understand what I'm working on right now. And I found that a little overwhelming. So let me give you an introduction about me as well. I was a math major in undergraduate at a small women's college. I had gotten into MIT, and as soon as I learned that only 25% of the population was women, I decided to go to the women's college down the street where I was a math major and often had classes with 3 people and could solve very challenging problems collaboratively and found a great mentor. And then after that, I went to graduate school and I started a PhD program at a top research university where I found myself to be one of very, very few women, and decided that it wasn't really a field that I wanted to go further in. So I got my master's degree, and went to places that had people of both genders because there really wasn't, it didn't feel open to me at the time. And I know that everyone's experience is different. So I found it really interesting how in Iran, at the time, there wasn't that feeling of, well, men and women have different abilities, because I felt that in this country. And then I worked as a professor in mathematics. I've done work in business, and now I'm at CTY. So I think between the three of us, we can hopefully answer some of these very hard questions that are coming in, and we'll do our best. There's lots of mathematical questions that we will ask Emily to maybe take on. So I have a couple of questions that kind of go together, Charles, and either one of you can answer, because I feel like both of you would have good information on this. So what are some practical applications of her work? Why are these theories important? So Charles asked the first question and Vida asked the second one. So why are these theories important? Is there any way to explain their relevancy in a way that a kid could understand? And then there's a whole bunch of questions about, is there a way to explain the magic wand theorem in a way that a younger child might be able to understand? So if Emily wants to start and George take it from there, then we'll do our best.
So I didn't know Miriam personally, but my guess would be that she was motivated in choosing the mathematical questions that she chose to study by aesthetics and by beauty more so than by practical application. So, what really distinguishes her work, and this was mentioned in the film when she was the second one to prove a theorem, but her proof was more elegant, is that it's just a really, really, really lovely idea. Rather than think about one surface and the curves on that one surface, think of the uncountably infinitely many surfaces that you can imagine. Maybe they don't all embed into three-dimensional space, but that's no obstacle. Maybe their geometries are curved and not flat. And she was able to dream up this world, this thing that they call a moduli space, where all these surfaces live together, and it allows you to kind of move between these different mathematical worlds. So that's something that lived in her imagination, and through her writing lives now in the imagination of other mathematicians. It didn't necessarily live there before, but it's something we can envision now. And so the application of her work, I would say, is that she shared this vision with the rest of us, and it results of hers, like the magic wand theorem, will allow other mathematicians to prove other theorems, which will then allow other mathematicians to prove other theorems. And then eventually down the line, there will be some practical consequence. But I think it's a misunderstanding of her work if it focuses too much on that aspect. Maybe I'll let George jump in.
My understanding is much less than Dr. Reel's. But I do feel that the mathematicians who work in the areas Miriam worked in, especially with Magic Wand, are really talking about the extensions of her ideas in connecting several fields that had not previously been connected. And that these extensions will continue to expand, and that new connections will be discovered because of the ways that she's introduced the techniques and ideas she's introduced in the moduli, in the idea of geometries and moduli spaces, and that some of these extensions, as already evident in her thesis work, really have touched on physics. And so the expansion of the ideas goes beyond mathematics and goes to theoretical physics. And so this would be considered applications, but not the kind of application that will tell you that you're going to find a better sardine can opener tomorrow. That kind of result, I think, might emerge 50 years from now in some area that may not exist today. And that's, I think, the magic of mathematics, is that there are always these unforeseen developments from research in the past that was never even part of the original idea, but that evolves gradually from the work of others who base their thoughts on the work of someone like Miriam, who has expanded the field. Please stop me, Dr. Reel, if I'm going off the rails.
I think that's a great way to explain research in mathematics. I think when we're young, especially in this country, mathematics is something that has right or wrong answers. And as you go further up in the field, you realize and you learn that there's this edge where there's all of these unsolved problems. And that's where mathematicians are working. And one of my inspirations to when I was an undergrad was a mathematician named Ramanujan, who also died young, and people are still decades later trying to parse his notebooks and understand what he did and the implications of it. And they're finding applications to fields like computer science and all of these things that never would have been known in his lifetime. So it's one of the purest fields, and it feels magical in that way, because sometimes mathematicians are living in this abstract world, and the practicalities of it come later. So that was just something that drew me to it when I was younger. And I also had an advisor who thought of mathematics as this magical field that was very fun to talk about. So let's move on to another question. May has asked this question. Do you think that Miriam's use of narratives and storytelling in her problem-solving approach indicates a value to broad education like literature, etc., for young people interested in mathematics?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. And, speaking to my own experience, I'm somebody who also knew I wanted to be a mathematician from when I was very young. But when I was an undergraduate, because I went to college in the US, I took courses in all sorts of different areas. And it was actually a course in the history department that taught me how to read math papers in a sense. Previously, I would just read the paper and, I like you would read a novel, you just sort of read it from the start to the finish. But what I learned in that course is that if you're really going to engage with very difficult technical arguments, you really need to be in dialogue with what you're reading. You need to write notes in the margins. You need to stop in the middle of a sentence and ask a question and see if you can think of an example and see if you can understand a flaw in the argument. And that's absolutely sort of essential for understanding a mathematics paper, but I learned it in a history course.
Yeah, I remember a college math professor who actually had to sit down and teach us how to read a math book, which you never do when you're younger. And it was really like you need a pencil and paper and can read one or two lines at a time. It takes that much concentration.
And it's not just reading, it's writing as well. If one of the most challenging things in mathematics is to convey an idea that's in your head to somebody else's head, particularly if it's a geometric or a visual type of mathematics. And so mathematicians communicate a lot in metaphors because it's sort of easier to give an impression of something and then let who's ever listening to it figure it out for themselves. So speaking is very important, writing is very important, and yeah, it all ties together.
One of the things in the movie that resonated for me was just how all-consuming it is. And I remember the days of graduate school where nobody could talk about anything else. Like we'd go out to dinner and the napkins would come out and no one can talk about anything but mathematics. And because your head's just constantly working and trying to figure out the answer to those problems. So George, did you want to answer this anymore, or shall I move on to the next?
I think you've covered that area. I think that earlier there was something that you mentioned earlier that I would like to comment on. I think that the educational system fails the students by not pointing out the huge world of unsolved problems that exists, and mathematics is taught as a set piece of things you have to learn because they're true. I think that the most exciting thing for a student is to come across some idea or problem that has never been solved, and to be told that not even the greatest people before before them has even come close to solving it. And this is something open and available to you as a student to try to put your mind to it and work on. And I think that that produces a kind of excitement that is lacking in most of the educational system, because people are worried that they don't understand. But the great part about mathematics is that lack of understanding of this huge world that is constantly being chipped away at. And you did hint at this, and I thought it was a very important subject.
Yeah, I agree with that. My undergraduate mentor just got me involved in research right away, and he had me co-author papers with him, even though I wasn't necessarily that advanced, but I knew enough. And there are things that are accessible, and I just found that so fun and so interesting. I actually have an Erdos number of 2 because of him, which what that means, it's you can watch his other movie to find out, but that's a big deal
Yes,
apparently.
yes.
And
I have a movie for you to watch on that subject.
right. But then I got to graduate school and research was so much further away, and you had to sort of prove yourself over and over again before they would let you do that. So it's really interesting how you get the fun stuff so far away. Okay, so actually we're talking about academics. So I have a few questions. One's from Shuka. I am fascinated by Miriam's work with the hyperbolic metric, etc. Do you recommend any courses I can take now or people I can talk to in order to explore more about it? I am currently taking AP Calc BC at CTY. Hooray, CTY. So Emily, do you have any ideas on where to go with that?
So I would look for a course in non-Euclidean geometry. I don't know the offerings at CTY or other places or what's available online. I know increasingly there's a lot of mathematics available online, on YouTube, or you can find a book that lets you develop some of the theorems along the way. But non-Euclidean geometry might be a fun subject. You'll learn about things like called projective geometry and spherical geometry and hyperbolic geometry.
And I have one more academic question from Rish, who would like to double major in math and physics in college. So any advice on what type of math to take to get there? Like algebra, calculus, partial differential equations, real analysis, and so on.
So since you know the phrase real analysis, you might be in a position to learn about proof-based mathematics as opposed to sort of calculation-based mathematics. And I think that would really give you a leg up if you start to play around with mathematical proofs. So the first time you often see proofs in school are in a geometry course where they tell you some theorems that are true about angles and triangles and all that, but then you have to use those properties to prove other properties yourself. But there's sort of more, proof really pervades mathematics. That's kind of what mathematicians are in the business of, is writing proofs. And it's, aside from a little bit of geometry, it's not something that most mathematics students see ever, really, or until college. And if that's something that interests you, that would be a fun topic to explore right then.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Emily. I have a couple of questions about competitions and things that that matter in math. So one student, Mapes, says if a young student very much enjoys math but doesn't like competing, would not participating in things like the Math Olympiad put them at a disadvantage?
Absolutely not. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Absolutely not. I mean, it's very, some people find mathematics competitions fun, some people don't. It has very little resemblance to mathematical research or even the work that you would do in a college math classroom. I mean, as Alex Eskin described the collaboration with Miriam Mirzakhani, they worked on the same problem for 6 years. That's completely unlike a mathematics competition, and somebody who excels at solving problems quickly might not excel at working at the same problem for 6 years. So if it's something you find fun, go for it. And if it's something you don't find fun, don't give it another thought.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that a lot of times the way we teach math here is so competitive and you have to do it quickly. And again, the same professor who made a difference in my life refused to give us timed exams.
Mhm.
He says that turns so many people off from mathematics. And you can take all the time you want, just think deeply about a problem. And that's where the fun is. And so this one is for you, Emily, because you know all of the math. It was implied that competitions were the only option if you like math growing up. When you were a kid, did you find this to be the case? Now that you know all of the math, what would you show kids if you had the choice? And this is from T.
Great. So great question. There are a lot of people who are innovating in opportunities for kids, very young kids even, to explore mathematics in a more collaborative way, in a less competitive way. So one person you might look at is a friend of mine. Her name is Eugenia Chang, and she, with collaborators, has been developing a whole bunch of workshops that are, more about puzzles and exploration than about competition. And these are for students of all ages. So there's a lot of opportunities in that direction.
That's awesome. So I have a couple of questions from Bhavy Girl.
I would like to add that
Go ahead.
I would like to suggest the Julia Robinson Math Festivals as another collaborative approach to working on math problems for young students, extracurricular for young students, as well as any of the math circles around the United States.
Yeah, thanks, George. That's exactly the right recommendation.
Awesome. So Puvy Girl has asked the question, did Miriam's contributions pave the path for diversity? And how do you think the world has changed since Miriam's contribution? And I'm just going to say one thing that I wrote down from the film that struck me, where the students were saying she was one of us. And I wrote down how much representation matters. And if I see somebody who looks like me or who doesn't look like everyone else who's doing the thing, that makes a difference and makes me want to continue. So that was my takeaway from it. But George, what do you think about that? And Emily?
After the filming we did in Iran, it was overwhelming impression of Miriam's impact on the high schools that we visited, and the students there who really seemed to, they were lining up to be interviewed, and all of them had a very strong idea of what they wanted to do, and they attributed it to her influence, to seeing her as a role model. And this was across the board. The two high schools we spent days filming in, every student, every girl had the same idea. Now, I don't know if this translates in the United States or how it translates in the United States, and but I have a feeling that women in math have embraced Miriam throughout the world, and my feeling is based on the popularity of this movie, which I'm handling for a little over a year now, and the demand for it by teachers and groups of women in math in different parts of the world, all around the world, in fact. So hopefully she's made an impact.
Yeah, I think that's true. And basically everybody I know has seen this film already. So kudos to you, George.
Yeah, so one of my closest friends from graduate school who also loved, Ramanujan, the mathematician, and her father's is one of the mathematicians who has spent his life studying him. I reached out to her before this panel and told her what we were doing, and she was like, "Oh, I've seen the film. I've written poems about her. She's been such an inspiration to every female mathematician that I know." And so that's a big testament to what a difference this has made. So Helen has asked a question, and you may or may not know the answer. Would you recommend some works of fiction that would get students 10 to 13 years old interested in exploring math? I have one that was for a slightly younger audience, and this is about the mathematician Ramanujan, and my friend just published it. It's called The Boy Who Dreamed of Infinity, but it's for a little bit younger. It's a picture book. That might be one to start with if you're looking for younger people, but I don't know about 10 to 13.
It's been a while since I was that age. But there's a book I remember, Uncle Pedro and Goldbach's Conjecture, that might be appropriate for that age or maybe slightly older. It's a bit of a laugh.
So
That's a very beautiful book.
Nice. Okay, and we're running out of time, so we have maybe about 4 more questions if we're allowed to have that much. How does Mirzakhani's work relating to geodesics and topology more broadly apply to string theory? So this is from IK, especially as it relates to Witten's conjecture. That might be a very long answer.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea.
Okay, all right. So let's not go there since we're running out of time. I have a couple of questions for George as we wrap up. So Almas would like to know if the movie is available for purchase, and Tushar would like to know what your upcoming film projects are.
Yes, the film is available at zalafilms.com, ZALA films.com, or secretsofthesurfacefilm.com. Various options. We have subtitles in about five languages, thanks to the International Mathematical Union's Women's Section, which sponsored worldwide screenings last year, and several people stepped forward to help with translations, and those are now available for download. And we have DVDs only in English and Farsi at this point. So the easiest thing is secretsofthefilm.com or zalafilms.com, and then you can find the film there along with other mathematical films. And the question about my future projects, I am preparing something for American Women in Mathematics. I'm also preparing something for MSRI about the journeys of Black mathematicians. That's all I can say about either of those at the moment.
That's awesome. I look forward to seeing what's next. Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you, George, for this great conversation.
It was a great pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you, Hopkins at Home, for showing this movie, and for everyone who attended. I hope that you enjoyed it and have some takeaways to think about.